Thanks for joining. We will get started very briefly. We'll just give folks some time to enter the room. Thanks for joining us. Okay, it looks like folks are still entering the room. We'll get started just for the sake of time. Hopefully everyone has their lunch. If not, maybe a nice refreshing beverage. But thanks for joining us. This is Beds Over Books, a webinar about developing affordable housing above public libraries. And so with our housing crisis continuing and land at a premium, the question remains, what public assets can we leverage to not just build more housing, but also update our public infrastructure? Right here in Richmond, Virginia, where I am, we have several libraries where I can certainly imagine housing above. But where do we start with this? You'll hear about this shortly. But first, I'd like to remind everyone to please utilize the Q&A feature to have your questions answered at the end of our presentations. And yes, we will provide the slides to you if you would like them. And then furthermore, I would encourage you to please take the survey that follows after you exit the webinar. This survey helps us continue to deliver content like this for you for free and helps us communicate our impact. And so to that end, I'd like to thank our generous sponsors, Virginia Housing, the Community Foundation for a Greater Richmond, the Shaberg Foundation, Atlantic Union Bank, VCDC, and Dominion Energy. And with that, I will actually turn it over to our first presenter, Michelle.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Michelle Delauz, and I am the Executive Director of the Fifth Avenue Committee, which is a 47-year-old nonprofit community development corporation based in Brooklyn, New York. And I'm actually joined by my colleague, Bill Yates, our Director of Housing Development. And we're going to share some information about New York City's first 100% affordable housing project over a new and expanded public library. So give me a second while I share screens. And here we go. Hopefully everybody's seeing that okay.
Yep.
Great, perfect. Let me just transfer. So this is the end product. So this is Sunset Park Apartments and Library. It's in Sunset Park, Brooklyn in New York. And folks, of course, know that New York City is the largest city in the United States, and Brooklyn is the most popular borough of the 5 boroughs in the city of New York. And Sunset Park's a community of over 120,000 people, mostly working class immigrant community, majority Latino and Chinese. This is the final product of 50 units over a 20,000 square foot public library. And it's the first in New York City to combine the 2 uses, and the first project, affordable housing project for families in the community in 20 years. So we're going to go over some of the history and background, our partnership with the Brooklyn Public Library, some of the community engagement and input that we sought, talk to you about some of the financing, construction, the exciting aspect of actually opening the doors, and how the model's being replicated. So this is what the branch used to look like years ago. So this was one of the like a lot of libraries across the country. Andrew Carnegie donated this site along with several other sites to the city of New York, more than 100 years ago. Of course, And then they tore down a beautiful old building, and they rebuilt it with this cinder block one single story structure in the 1970s. And this was a woefully inadequate situation. And the whole story of like how this came together is back in 2006, and I included an article from the New York Times in 2006 when there was a printed Metro section of the New York Times. This is the front page of the Metro section. And, Fifth Avenue Committee had been, looking around for publicly and privately owned underutilized sites where we could have multiple uses and have affordable housing on top. And single story public libraries came up a lot in our search, as did USPS sites or postal service sites and supermarkets. And so, and we knew that the Brooklyn Public Library system at the time had over $300 million worth of capital needs throughout their system. And so, and that was just to kind of keep the really inadequate space. This was actually the sixth busiest branch in the entire Brooklyn Public Library system. So, just to give you a sense of that. So a little bit more background. As I mentioned, Fifth Avenue Committee, we're a nonprofit CDC. So our mission is to advance economic, social, and racial justice in New York City. One of the ways that we do that is to build and manage affordable housing. We've built over 1,600 units of affordable housing over our history, and we have a 2,000 unit of affordable housing pipeline, in addition to a whole bunch of other work that we do in the community. Our partner with this, the Brooklyn Public Library, they're the sixth largest library system in the country, over 62 branches, over 1.7 million card holders. And we started our conversation with the Brooklyn Public Library, as I mentioned, back in 2006, to redevelop their obsolete library in the Sunset Park neighborhood. And we were really trying to create a very, a win-win situation for the library, to address the affordable housing needs that exist in the city and in particular in this community, and to do it cost effectively. So, there's a unique situation perhaps in that the Brooklyn Public Library is a separate nonprofit organization where the city of New York owns or leases on behalf of the library most of the public libraries, if not all the public libraries that Brooklyn Public Library uses. And so, we in our discussions about this effort, it was with the Brooklyn Public Library. It also involved the city of New York. And the big thing that we had to get over, and that took many attorneys time to figure out, was how they were going to honor the Carnegie donation and allow us to take title while the project was under construction, while acknowledging that once we were done, we were going to basically give back to the city of New York a separate library condo space. And of course, we had to negotiate some key things at the beginning, including how much we were going to pay for the land, and the value of the work that we performed on behalf of the Brooklyn Public Library to deliver back to them a core and shell. I mentioned the condominium structure. This is something Fifth Avenue Committee has done in many other projects, actually, where basically there's the affordable residential condo, and then a commercial condo. In this case, the commercial condo is the library. Brooklyn Public Library sought their own separate funding for the build out of that library space. I mentioned their $300 million in capital needs. The city of New York at the time was only either directly through the city or through essentially earmarks from local elected officials. They were only receiving, $10 to $20 million a year in capital funds to address their deferred capital needs in the various library spaces. So they knew they needed to kind of like think very differently about how to address their capital needs. And so in this situation, they basically were able to double the library space that this building I, showed you a picture of. It was about 11,000 square feet, but it was so inefficiently designed that less than 9,000 of it was actually publicly accessible. And so, in the new space, there's 20,000 of publicly accessible square feet. So, they knew they wanted to redo that to have a modern library. And, we can talk more if you have questions about some of their sources for that. But it wasn't just the city of New York as their source. And by building it together with the affordable housing, it costs them half as much as if they'd had a standalone 20,000 square foot library. Part of our agreement with the library, of course, included fees for late delivery, and we have a memorandum of understanding between the Fifth Avenue Committee and the Brooklyn Public Library. Just a little bit about the community engagement and outreach, because that was significant. Believe it or not, there was a small group of people that was really vocal and that was in opposition to 100% affordable housing and a new and expanded public library, because they just believed it was too good to be true. And they were very, very concerned that the library would be closed and that nothing might appear in the future. And so, again, I mentioned the diversity of the community. So the Fifth Avenue Committee and the Brooklyn Public Library worked with a nonprofit planning firm, Hester Street Collaborative, which unfortunately no longer exists. But we did, stakeholder meetings, focus groups, presenting all around. The community did workshops and charrettes where the community gave input literally into the specific spaces of the library, like a teen space, spaces for young children, adult spaces, recording studio, where the community room should be, how it should be accessible after hours. And quite honestly, the vision for the library originally was only 2 floors and it was less than 20,000 square feet. But as a result of the community input process, it grew to be over 3 floors and up to 20,000 square feet. And we actually had to adjust the total number of affordable housing units in the building to accommodate the community's desire for more library space, and in particular, more library space that was accessible to a lot of light. So that was a really important piece of, having that conversation and that dialogue with the community in English and Spanish and Mandarin and Arabic to get all of that input that resulted in the final, building plans for the project. And this was very critical. And one of the big commitments that we made to the community, again, the historic branch, though very inadequate, was very loved. And they wanted specifically to have a temporary library space, not just a bookmobile. And this just is some highlights of some of the press, like the project absolutely captured the imagination of the community and quite honestly, the city. And it has been incredibly well received and is already being replicated. And I'm going to pass it over to Bill to provide more details.
Thank you, Michelle. So in order to get us there, one of the kind of main set of hurdles we had to get over was how exactly to finance this and how to make it work. I'm gonna go back one, here we go. How to make it work, right, with today's existing affordable housing programs, with other sources of financing that might be better suited to the construction or build out of library space, and how to make it work in particular for private lenders. So I think the main upshot here is that we really had to be very careful with funding eligibility restrictions. Time and again, you would kind of sit down with folks who, for instance, I should start with, our main source of financing here was 9% low-income housing tax credit equity, very much focused on just, building housing units and moving on. And there are provisions for community space. And the puzzle here was how to make it work so that our building would have that community space, but it would be in a separate condo, and how to kind of make sure we weren't crossing any lines, whether it was with the original funding application and the funding source restrictions, whether it was later with the cost certification that would need to be done on the project. So from the state of New York's perspective, they were the allocator of the 9% low-income housing tax credit equity. There was a real desire to just make sure that their funds went for the housing. We accessed separate state funds for the build, the core and shell on the sub-level first and second floors of the building that the library would come in later and build out. And so what it required pretty much from the get-go was a budget with two separate columns, one for the housing, one for the library space. So, that involved the contractor having two separate AIA budgets for the project. They would, be requesting each month one thing for the housing, build reimbursement, and then another for the library, and kind of just keeping those, very separate and very apparent. Michelle had mentioned a sort of New York specific requirement where this property, after being deeded to an affiliate of Fifth Avenue Committee in order to build the project, right, and serve as collateral for the construction lender, the condo space had to be delivered back to the city of New York. So we only highlight that here to say, you and your communities, your jurisdictions may have certain funding, or ownership requirements that you have to kind of like really look into and understand and make sure that they're going to work with the funding sources. And then lastly, our total budget here was $36 million. It involved a construction loan, which converted to a perm loan, low-income housing tax credit equity, a significant amount of subsidy from the city housing department, a portion of which was allocated by a local council member, and some other bells and whistles to kind of make the budget, fully pencil out. So the next slide is a quick shot of the building under construction, and you can see it here. And even at this stage, this is when COVID was starting to kind of rear its head, and it was really difficult to imagine, getting this building to the finish line and to what it would end up being. Michelle, if you want to go to the next slide. So a couple of particulars here. We did use different architects. The residential architect handled basically the main building and the core and shell of the library, and then the library space, the Brooklyn Public Library engaged their own architect. So that required a bit of coordination. We had one kind of particular thing occur on our project. The library kind of came to us as we were closing on the construction loan with some redesign elements. So that led to some delays. It led to some requirements to go back and redo our transit authority approvals. We were building above an MTA subway line. So we just mentioned that to say, there may well be specific kind of site, needs that if you kind of switch gears and want to do something different, you might need to go back and visit. And the chance for that to happen if there are two parties involved with the development, which there, very much work here, that can increase. We also, a little bit specific to the time, but we did hit a number of COVID-19 pandemic related challenges, including some supply chain delays, including higher interest rates. We also had, a bit of a time, despite the overwhelming demand for the housing units, getting through the lease up approval process. So you always want to, have as much cushion in your budget as possible for unforeseen events like that. And then lastly, we did have a very also probably New York specific challenge when it came to certificates of occupancy. We had, because they were separate condos and the building, could be given occupancy certificates floor by floor. There was a requirement to get a certificate of occupancy on the separate library space before the city of New York would take back ownership of it. And needless to say, that was something a little bit tough for the city buildings department to wrap their heads around, and involved a lot of kind of follow up, we're ready for it. We need this occupancy certificate type of discussions with the Department of Buildings in order to get their approval. I think we can go, okay. So this is the good part, right? This is a little bit of a close-up of the facade of the building, and you can see the glass that Michelle had referred to. We were granted our TCO in 2022, and we already had a number of approved applicants lined up and ready to move in. The library space got its TCO in November 2022, and the library started their build out at that point. Now I can safely say this, a chief worry that I had in my mind was that the library build out, given noise, dust, etc., might prove to be something challenging for the new residents. And frankly, knock on wood, it went very well. And I don't know about you, Michelle, I didn't hear a single complaint about the build out. And thankfully that was an issue that just never, came to pass. We converted to our permanent financing in May of 2023. And we waited until November 2023 when the library was ready to do to open their doors to do a joint ribbon cutting for both the library space and the residential. I think we might have highlighted on the next page. There you go. All right. So if you just look at the expression on people's faces, it really, the amount of time and effort and energy and just the amount of folks who had to, work on this project, it really shows in that photo. And we were just thrilled. The library was thrilled. The electeds were thrilled. It was just a great day opening those doors. And that's a shot of the library space. You can see a mural in the background. And yeah, it was just a terrific celebration once we were ready. Here are two shots of the library itself. A world of difference from the bunker style glass brick 1970s building that was there before. As Michelle has mentioned, it just, has been overwhelmingly, well received. And here's a shot of one of the residential units prior to the residents moving in. We did opt for a few nice finishes, including hardwood floors, which were great. We wanted to really keep everything like very bright and open and so forth. These units get a lot of light. And as you go up in the building, you got some nice views, including, you can't quite make it out here, some views of New York Harbor. So just like really, really just nice housing units.
We have some tenants who have views of the Statue of Liberty. So it's amazing.
I think on our next slide.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually a more recent New York Times article from February of this year about one of our tenants, Miguelina, and her son, Ian. And like this has been a transformative project for the community overall because of what the library brings, but you can only imagine what it means to low and moderate income families to live above a library and what resource that is. And people are just thrilled. One of the things that we did even before the library opened is we had a private tour for the tenants of the building, and they were able to get library cards, as part of their lease signing and things like that. Like we really, just thrilled for what this means for the community, but also for the families that live above the space.
And I'll just say, if you want a tear brought to your eye, Google this article, and it says it all. It really just, captures how wonderful this has been for a number of those tenants.
And I'll just say, there's 49 units total. There's 50 units total, one for a super. 40 of them were available through a lottery system that the city of New York has, which is primarily online. You can also apply on, by mail. Over 60,000 people applied for those 40 units. 9 of the units were set aside for families coming out of the shelter system. So, and every tenant that moves in know that they were one of 60,000 essentially. It's crazy.
Right. Maybe I'll kick this off, Michelle. I'll pass it back then over to you. So yeah, so really what we were doing here was creating a model, right? And this is the first time this had been done. Happened to be the first affordable housing for families in Sunset Park in 20 years. And we broke a lot of ground really doing this. It involved a lot of kind of need for negotiating, for seeking creativity from funding partners, from those who administer funding programs. It really necessitated a strong partnership and a lot of trust between Brooklyn Public Library and Fifth Avenue Committee. We had a lot of challenges thrown our way, but because of that trust and the strength of the partnership, we were able to overcome them and get to where we are today. The New York Public Library, a separate library system, which runs libraries in, I want to say
Manhattan, Staten Island, and the Bronx, and the Bronx. Yeah.
I got it. They have done one project in Inwood, which is the upper portion of Manhattan. They've RFP'd a second in the Bronx, and they might have done a third. So we were seeing this, thankfully, being replicated, right? And so that's important. Michelle, maybe I'll pass it on to you for the challenges, and we'll close it out.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of highlighted a lot of the challenges. It really is important that you pick the right partners and that you really think ahead to all of the coordination issues that are going to come up with these two spaces, and how one is equally important to oftentimes to the city or the community in which it's happening. So yeah, happy to share more during the Q&A period, but we will stop here and pass it over to David.
Thank you so much. Eric or Jonathan, could you, thank you for allowing me to start my video. Great, there's the prompt. And here we are, great. First of all, I would just like to offer congratulations to Bill, Michelle, and their teams for what looks like a pretty incredible project. And I will be sharing from the library director's point of view what this opportunity and these opportunities look like. We're not as far along as Brooklyn and New York are, and we're sort of been watching projects both in Brooklyn, New York, Chicago, DC, just to name a few, to have some lessons learned there. So I'm David Leonard. I'm the president of the Boston Public Library, and that's a role that I have held for about 10 years now. And in my previous role, actually oversaw our capital projects work. So have a little extra flavor of what it takes to renovate a branch system. So let me share my slides, and I will present for about the next 15 minutes, which will give us then time for Q&A in the remaining part of the webinar. And I'm going to start out by situating, that's not in full screen mode. Hello, there we go, great. So I'm going to give you a little context for this, again, coming from the library point of view, which will be kind of another version of the story. And with full credit to my colleagues from Fifth Avenue, not necessarily a housing expert or a financing advocate expert, but there are other partners similar to Fifth Avenue in our ecosystem that have helped these projects come along. So the Boston Public Library has 25 branches throughout the city of Boston, and we actually have been on a pretty good track of renovating a number of branches after a particularly dry period from a funding point of view, several of which have won awards for their design and community process. And we have 3 projects that are going forward under what we're calling our Housing with Public Assets program, which is a program of the city of Boston. And those projects are in 3 separate neighborhoods, each one a little different from each other and at different stages of their planning and development process. That's in our Chinatown neighborhood, our Uplands Corner neighborhood in Dorchester, for those of you that might know Boston, and in the West End, which is one of the more downtown core areas along with Chinatown. Now, I'll be referring to BPL, so with full apologies to Brooklyn Public Library, as we lovingly call the other BPL. So just in case there's any confusion, just put that to rest. So a little more context. I'll skip through this. The slides will be available if anyone wants to look these up, but system-wide in 2024, about 2.3 million visits to our in-person locations, books borrowed, about 1.8 physical books, about 4.8 electronic books. So really, really robust system. So that's just to situate a little context where we serve not just the city of Boston, but also part of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We just completed a strategic plan. So some of these principles we bring forward into our choices of how to design libraries. That's thinking of the library as a lifelong learning and research partner, providing welcoming destinations. That's key for our branches because branches are, now offer space in a way that they're just not containers of books or programs, but that the use of community space is itself part of the service. To then also to be a trusted resource and a community engager. So again, just to situate finally some more context about the branch system, there are 25 branches, plus our central library here, bringing us to 26 locations. Looking back over the portfolio, about 13 of those 25 locations have had some level of major renovation since 2000, either a complete renovation of the building as it is, and total new build, or a interior refresh. There have been 10 that are remaining in need of major renovation. Most of these projects have been done with the City of Boston's capital budget, with occasional supplements from the state, from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And we have been considering which of these projects, which of these locations, which of these neighborhoods would be right for exploration of housing on top of a library, the beds on top of books model, to borrow the name of the webinar. Two early projects that we looked at, the Fields Corner location and the Eggleston Square location. The Fields Corner site was simply too tight. The total footprint of that location was too tight to warrant the number of housing units you could do on top. The financing simply wouldn't work given the size of the site and the height restrictions there. So this will not be right for every location, every neighborhood, and every financing model. In one of the other locations at our Eggleston Square neighborhood, the community pushed back, not because they didn't agree with the concept, but they felt that there were a number of other housing developments right nearby, and it was more important to have open space or green space on any excess part of that site, and so that one didn't go forward. We have a couple of other locations where it's under consideration, but I will now move to talk about the three that did move forward. So again, why would we even consider this? Well, Boston's population is growing and continues to grow. We do not, like other parts of the country, also in urban environments, have sufficient housing stock. Even though the growth might be slowing down a little bit, it is still continuing to grow. We do not specifically have a sufficient amount of affordable housing in addition to general housing availability. And we do have a homeless and housing instability challenge within our urban environment as well. Now, for those of you who know Boston, you will know that we are a densely built city. We are on the water, and we are surrounded on the land side by a number of other towns and jurisdictions. So it is not obvious where we would, as a city, build housing. So in about the 2016-2018 period, the city went through a review of all city-owned lots and property. The birth of this concept of housing with public assets was arrived at, and a public RFI process, request for information process, was run in early 2018, which resulted in a lot of great community feedback, a number of design concepts from architects and developers, and really demonstrating that while this might not be right in other areas, it was certainly a concept worth examining further. The obvious logical choices given those concepts and the analysis pointed us to some surface parking lots, some fire department locations that were due for renovation, and some library locations. To date, it's largely been the library locations that have gone forward into planning. And similar to the comments shared by my colleagues, two of the biggest concerns were questions about parking and open spaces. Indeed, as I mentioned, one of the projects that we didn't move forward with was due to the open spaces concern. So, first project to share with you. The Chinatown neighborhood has not had a dedicated branch since the 1950s. We have had a temporary space open for about the last 7 years. And we literally just did the groundbreaking for this site last month. The lead agency on the developer side is Asian Community Development Corporation. This will create a 12-story building with 66 affordable rental apartments and 44 affordable home ownership units, with a 2-story library on the bottom floor. And you can see that in the rendering on the left of this location at 55 Hudson Street in Boston's Chinatown district. Information about all of these projects is on our website, and although you might not be able to click on the slide directly, they will be available afterwards, and we'll drop them in the chat during Q&A as well. So we're really, really excited to have this project move forward. And indeed, the financing is complicated, the community process is complicated, but I'll share more about that in my notes in about 2 slides' time. The second project that is maybe running a little bit behind the Chinatown one, but all 3 of these have developers on board. They've gone through their first levels of approval, and we have architects on board as well. Typo in this one, apologies for that. So for 2024, this is the West End project. The lead developer is POA and Cass Capital as a partnership in Cambridge Street in the West End. And this will be a 2-story branch again with 119 income restricted units of housing above it. This particular neighborhood allows for a little bit of taller height, and that's why we have that number as possible in this location. And again, in both cases, the sites aren't huge, so we're delivering a 2-story library, which is pretty common, even though our ideal preference is to stick to a 1-story library. In either case, the sweet spot for our current designs are in the 15,000 to 20,000 square foot of usable space. You know, every location, every urban environment is slightly different, but for Boston, given our population size and our neighborhoods and the number of branches in the city, that is what we've determined is the right model. The third project, again, slightly differently and running about the same timeline as the West End one, probably about a year behind the Chinatown project. This will be a 5-story building, mixed use, 2 floors again for the public library, and 3 upper floors containing about 33 workforce-oriented residential home ownership units. The interesting thing about this location is there was an older bank facade that needs to be incorporated into the final design. So I should say, in the case of Chinatown, it was formerly a parking lot, and so it's new build in a blank slate location. The West End project it's the existing site of the library where it is, which provides an additional set of challenges. And Upham's Corner is a bank building and parking lot location, former bank building, I should say. So our old location, which is one of the most inaccessible of our branches in the portfolio, can stay operational until it can move to the new location. So different challenges with each of those. Some notes, which I think will echo a little of the work shared for Brooklyn and New York by Bill and Michelle, but there are procurement law challenges with any of this. So Boston Public Library operates as a city department and falls fully under all of the requirements that a city department would have for procuring space, hiring a developer, hiring a contractor. We are deeply connected to our Office of Housing, to our Office of Economic Development, and to our planning department. And in each of these three different projects, the initial lead has been a different city department because of where the target property came through. Ultimately, our lessons learned from the legal and ownership models involve a preference that the city retain the ultimate property ownership and issue a ground lease to the developer. The library becomes a condoized unit within the development, but at the master condo level. So we're not one among 119, but we're one among, say, 3, where the other 2 would be the rental units grouped together and the ownership units grouped together. We have hired in each case a separate architect who coordinates with the developer's architect, because building of libraries falls under our city's public facilities department. But for the library process, we are following what we would normally do for a renovation and a design and a fresh build project, which is go through a programming study where we understand the needs of the neighborhood and the goals of the library, go through formal design, and go through construction. In these cases, it's build out within a overall development, but that allows for the full level of community engagement that we would normally have. We have learned that how one builds a housing development and how one builds a library building actually have different standards, different rules, and so reconciling those adds complexity. I think these projects will be worth it. Our communities are very excited, but there is deeper complexity than doing either alone. The community engagement challenges, I think, are also real. I think we heard from our colleagues about the skepticism that can occur, but we've also heard of the benefit, ultimately, of being able to help solve part of the housing challenges, but equally ensure that we get brand new, updated, and modern library services. However, the planning process and developer process, which has rules around community involvement, and library design processes have also got their own community engagement processes. So the more people stay in dialogue together, the better off the result ultimately will be. And so that's a quick review of our 3 projects, the overall context of BPL as Boston Public Library, and some notes and takeaways so far. So we look forward to being able to share as much detail and joy as our colleagues did when these projects are complete. But at this point, let me just point you to 2 additional URLs where you can find more information, specifically at the City of Boston for the Housing with Public Assets history. And then you can review our branches landing page with additional information for all of our projects, including the 3 that are moving forward as Housing with Public Assets projects. So Eric and team, I will stop sharing there and pass it back to you for the next stage of our webinar.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Michelle. Have everyone else come back on? Let's see. And we'll jump into some Q&A here. And thank you, everyone, for putting your questions in here. We've had a lot of questions come through, so happy to get to them. We'll just kind of start off with this first one, actually. And this was for Michelle and Bill. Could you talk about, the timeline for engaging with Brooklyn Public Library, and getting them on board with this redevelopment?
Well, I mentioned the New York Times article from 2006. So,
Yep.
I mean, it was a couple of years. Like, I think everybody loved the concept at Brooklyn Public Library from the get-go, but it wasn't just getting them on board, it was getting the city of New York on board with the idea. And then, quite honestly, because it is the first project ever done, and it was going to be the first, there were a lot of questions that had to be answered. So even though the concept, everybody was like, "Wow, we love this concept. We just got to figure out how to do it," and it took a while to it took years to figure out how to do it. But yeah, and they had some leadership transitions early on. Like, we're talking the early 2000s. It's the the current head of the Brooklyn Public Library she's been there. Linda's been there for a number of years and is fantastic.
David, on your end, was there any convincing that was needed to kind of get you on board with this program of the city, or?
I think our team has always been very sensitive to the housing needs more generally. And so I think we're very open to the idea. The challenges were much more on how on earth were we going to make this work? Because as I alluded to, not all city departments, we may all fall under the mayor's vision and have the same goals in mind, but we're not necessarily used to doing projects like this together. So it was really a case of, well, who should lead on each one? And then how do we ensure each department's goals are actually met through a comprehensive process, even if we're owning different parts of the process? So we've learned a lot. And I think each successor project will benefit from the earlier ones where we've cut our teeth on this. I think basically the community, getting community buy-in and agreement was also a similar exercise. Again, no one's against the concept if we can make it work. And I would say that it is, you have to be upfront that there is more complexity and it takes longer. Like if we could just go build our own library, that would be faster than doing this. Not driven so much by the complexity, but driven by the subsidy requirements and financing requirements that a housing development like these would normally require, whether they're standalone or in combination with something else. I think the Chinatown project, which we just did the groundbreaking for, I think the head of ACDC shared that there was something like 21 different entities providing financing to the overall project. And that's a lot.
Yeah, I think there's a question on here about financing strategies and sources that were considered. And so, I think just generally, if folks could talk about, yeah, what are those financing barriers, and yeah, what in the financing landscape needs to change to kind of make these projects work.
I'll just mention something briefly, and then I'll turn over to Bill. One of the things we considered at first were new market tax credits, specifically for the library structure. And going back to the complexity piece, and that was kind of ruled out actually by the Brooklyn Public Library at the time for this site, for the site we just shared. Not to say that it might not be right for a future site. Yeah, so we did consider it. We were looking at something that obviously that the affordable housing piece and the financing, the affordable housing, and the number that Bill shared of $36 million total development cost. That was for the residential, the entire building, but the residential, but not the build out of the library space. That was another separate $17 million. So I'm sure you have thoughts on this.
Yeah, and to share a little further, I think two things. One is each and every one of our typical or traditional housing subsidy sources comes with a lot of requirements, right? And so any city or state housing agency staff member, they've got no choice. They've got to make sure that you're meeting those requirements. So I think it involves a lot of just kind of like going into it eyes wide open, making sure you're communicating very clearly with whether it's the project manager level, definitely their senior management, how what we're trying to do here is a little different, but why it still works. I think you have to be a bit creative in locating certain subsidy sources that can work. So community facility sourcing is really like big here. We had a really sort of particular kind of issue came up whereby the money that was being provided to the capital stack as a perm source was coming in as a grant, but that would not work for a LIHTC project, right? They can't get a grant, it becomes taxable income. So there was a lot of sort of upfront work that had to be done, in particular with the tax credit syndicator and their accountants and their counsel to structure who was going to get that grant, how it was going to come into the project, and work. And meanwhile, on the library side, they were not able to borrow the money, right? Like they're restricted from doing that. So it was really a puzzle to sort of get it all, to work. So the second part of what I just want to share here was it's probably good to, believe it or not, engage an accountant early and be running some of these questions by them, because we had, and it was the last thing in the world we wanted, but when we were doing the cost certification for the project for the LIHTC, they were asking like elementary questions about the purchase price and how is this going to work, and and we got it resolved, but it was, needless to say, not a topic you want to be covering after
We thought we answered that 10 years ago.
And yeah, exactly, or like my predecessor or his predecessor, right? So and that's it too. When you have such a long timeline with things, there's really got to be like clear kind of note-taking, recording of like, okay, we've established this, it's a written signed agreement, we know where to look. And the MOU, even though it was missing certain things that just weren't on folks' radar, I turned to that again and again, and it was only like 23 pages. It was clear English, so it was a really good source for like, okay, here's what we agreed to with our partner, the library, in terms of who was gonna take responsibility for this, or how this was going to be approached. So providing some kind of simple roadmap, I think, really helps for some of these financing questions.
Yeah, I would echo that. Even within the city of Boston, having different departments enshrine what their agreements and who's on first for what things in an MOU. So it's not just MOU with the external entities that we're in partnership with, and then determining what goes in the P&S and what goes in condo documents for a master condo and for individual condos. It's like those are all vehicles available to clarify areas of concern, and yeah, use them all for sure. I think the funding, the other part of the funding question is clarifying, from a library and city point of view, normally we would have capital budget dollars available for possibly site acquisition or for build out. And what do those translate to in the context of these kind of shared developments? And in each of our three, in one it's rental only, in the other it's home ownership only, and the third is a mixture. So those three flavors all have their own sets of rules and financing challenges as well.
This question's for Bill and Michelle. Did FAC purchase the land? Is it donated from BPL? And then this additional question is just about did BPL purchase the library condo from FAC?
We purchased the land. Go ahead, Bill. Yeah.
But yeah, and the way we did it though was rather than pay them cash, we promised to give back a library core and shell space that was equivalent in value to the assessed, like appraised value of the land that we built the project on, right? Because the library needed to ensure that, okay, here's what it's worth, what we're giving up. So we have to make sure that what we're getting back is going to equate that. And there was some other kind of like considerations with regard to HVAC work and things like that were brought in to like true it up, so to speak, so that we were giving the library back in value what they had given up.
Jose has this question. I'm kind of talking about, building layout, maybe a little bit about programming. Are there any kind of expectations for residents when sharing that space with, public amenity? And then any things about, point of entry? Are there shared amenities that between the library and the residential spaces?
In Brooklyn, the building's on a corner, so the residential entrance is on the side street and the library entrance is on the main street, and that was an intentional part of the design to have them be separate. There is a second floor terrace that is accessible for the residents of the residential side of the building, that a couple times a week during library programming, we close off the residential entrance, and then library patrons use that terrace to do gardening and, toddler reading time kind of a thing. And that was something that was part of the vision from the beginning, is that there was going to be some space. And what's really nice, it's on the second floor, and the interior part of the library has a big glass window. So, the people sitting on the terrace who are, folding their laundry or something like that can look in and see the kids in the library. They can't get into the library through that. They have to go all the way around and go in the library entrance. And also the kids can kind of see what's going on in the terrace space. But, basically there's a coordination of programming of time that happens on the residential side and and on the terrace. And then also the residents of the building gave up a community room as part of the expansion of the library space. We kind of had to shrink something on the residential side, and the residents in the building gave up a community room. So we have a special agreement with the Brooklyn Public Library where the residents have access to the community room in a different way than the public does.
Yeah, our model is certainly also to keep as much of the operational sides of the house separate. So separate elevators, separate entrances, separate egress stairs, as much as possible. It'll be easier for coordination for operating both. But the hope is certainly that the proximity will have additional benefits. But the goal here is not building an integrated housing and library concept, but more about using the resource to deliver on a new library and additional housing units on a single site. So that may be an important distinction. There may be other models where the other would work. I haven't seen any in the U.S. where that's the case yet. Certainly for a public library, at least.
From Enterprise has some technical questions here about how is the condominium structured in a way to protect affordable housing? If we can start with that one.
Want to take that one, Bill?
Sure. So we did a condominium, we submitted a condominium offering plan to the state attorney general. They're the office that kind of administers that in the state of New York. And for simplicity's sake, it was set up with a residential condo and a library condo. It was all the kind of same bells and whistles with regard to, any building that's set up with multiple condominiums. Who's responsible for what, who handles maintenance, et cetera, what are shared, kind of common elements, and how billing should work for costs related to those elements. So that's kind of all the nuts and bolts kind of condominium. There's nothing specific in the condominium offering plan with regard to protections for affordable housing. Where we have those are in the regulatory agreement. So as part of getting low-income housing tax credits, as part of getting city capital funding for the project, we had to agree to both the state and the city of New York to sign regulatory agreements. That's what protects the affordable housing and the rents on those units, and also dictates the requirements as far as household income for qualifying for the units. MEP vertical runs, no parking. We were exempt. So that was good. And then the last part of the question was
It's
MEP
literally
vertical.
on top of a subway, literally.
There's no room for it anyway. So thankfully that, didn't come into the mix. For MEP vertical runs, they do run through the housing up to the roof. And we have separate library dedicated equipment on the roof versus residential. And that's mostly all separate. I think there's one electric bill we share, but aside from that, we're separate.
David, I know parking is certainly an issue in Boston too. How are you handling parking?
So that was up to each developer, the lead developer, to address and propose. So that needed to be part of their submission for the overall approval. I know that the Upham's Corner one, the third one, actually proposed doing some parking on site for the residents. But for our downtown libraries, we do not guarantee like staff or patron parking. We just work with our transit department to ensure that the sidewalk parking or curbside parking is appropriately provisioned. So yeah, not uncontroversial, but those are the rules.
Matt made a clarification here in terms of protections. He was talking about special assessments. Not sure if that helps you there, Bill.
That's an interesting question. I mean,
Let's
obviously,
see.
we have a condo budget that hopefully covers most expenses, but these days insurance is a concern. So it's possible. I mean, it's possible that, for instance, because that's a shared expense between the library condo and the residential condo, that there potentially could be.
Wanted to get to Tamara's question here, talking about the financing for the home ownership units in Boston. Yeah, since they aren't leveraging LIHTC, what does that look like?
Yeah, I'm going to have to take that as a follow-up.
Okay.
I don't want to weigh into probably what is the most complicated part of this to understand and get it wrong. So we have an incredible team of finance experts in our city's housing department who understand how to do the math work to the best ability of our residents in terms of AMI eligibility and how that applies for different neighborhoods and so on and so forth. So it's a really, really great question and a really, really important one when we're talking about any level of affordable housing. And sometimes you have to put affordable in quotes for all of the reasons that we know about versus market rate housing. And any subsidies that are applied to support the development are based upon what the ultimate AMI supported housing levels are. But we're about to exhaust my knowledge of this topic and I would not want to get this wrong. So we're happy to point people to our project page and housing office for more details.
Trinity's question here is talking about local incentives. So did either of your local governments, are they providing any additional help here, permit fee waivers, additional grant funding or anything like that?
In the city of New York, absolutely provided subsidy for the affordable housing component. And I'll just say, during the first Trump administration, our project was about to close on construction financing with the LIHTC, and then just the promise of a tax break, decreased the value of our low-income housing tax credits, blowing a hole in our construction budget, which required us to go and seek several $1 million in capital subsidy from our local council member. The council members here have just some discretionary fund, and luckily the local council member was able to do that to plug our hole so we could get to closing. So yeah, I mean, millions of dollars in subsidy, I will just say, as the city of New York. And we also had funding from the state of New York as well.
Great.
Yeah, for us, those would be covered under the housing developer subsidy programs, which are ultimately a combination of city and state funds, but administered by the city's Office of Housing.
And I would add here, and it gets a little bit into replicating the model, and I meant to say this earlier. We have had at least one, and I want to say maybe more than one, organized visit by just the city housing agency staff, literally 10, 15 people to come and look at the project and ask questions and better understand it and so forth. And I think that really speaks to their willingness to try and like replicate this elsewhere and to not, see funding turned away or what have you, because it just, doesn't quite fit. So for sure, I think, it's safe to say that the city of New York anyway is very interested in replicating this in various ways.
Was there an entitlement process or rezoning process for these properties?
In Sunset Park, so in order to dispose of city-owned land, there has to be a ULURP process, what's called the Uniform Land Use Review Procedure. So even though the zoning didn't change, it was pretty much within as of right. There were some small waivers. Because the property was coming to the Fifth Avenue Committee, and then of course the library condo going back, it needed to go through a public review process, which is the same exact process as if it were a rezoning, by the way.
Mhm.
That's actually up on a ballot measure coming up
Oh,
for
geez.
affordable housing, which would change that in the future. So
Yeah, we're similar, not exactly the same set of rules, but equivalent enough things that have to be taken into consideration. And so I think when it comes to the replicability of these projects, I think, not to speak for my colleagues, but we can give people the right questions to be asking, but the answers could be not quite wildly different, but rather unique to each locality and each state or territory in terms of what rules they have to follow, what the partnership with the city is. There are certainly locations in the country where the libraries are part of a county or independent versus part of a city, and all of those rule sets could be slightly different. But these are great projects as far as I can tell. I don't see my mind changing on that, even though we're not done yet. But how they get done and the financing required is going to be quite different in every jurisdiction.
when Fifth Avenue Committee brought the idea of building housing over underutilized, library spaces, we were specifically looking at spaces that had the zoning to allow for the residential above, where the library was just grossly underbuilt for the space. And that was part of our selling point. Like, you get a lot of underutilized publicly owned land here. Let's figure out how to leverage it to have, a win-win situation.
And the underutilized component could be the floors above an existing space that there's nothing built on. So, I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I think we touched a little bit about replicability. But for folks in other parts of the country, here in Virginia, that want to see this happen, that don't have a FAC or don't have a city that's already thinking about this, what should they do? Who should they talk to about seeing this happen? Is it their electeds? Is it their should we be talking to our public library administrators?
I'll say real quick. So, part of my story of this process was I was going in to meet with Tish James, okay, our Attorney General for the state of New York. At that point, she was council member, Tish James. We were going in to ask for discretionary capital money for another project, and out walked Brooklyn Public Library from the meeting because they were asking for money too. It's that time of year, everybody going and asking for money. And she's like, oh my gosh, they just came in. They told me about $300 million in capital needs. I don't know what I'm going to do. I've got $2 million. And I'm like, we've been thinking about this. We've got an idea, right? Like, we have an idea on how to solve this. And this idea took off, like, with elected officials. Like, okay, like, people are coming in, like, housing, libraries. How do we solve these problems? So I think if you don't have a Fifth Avenue committee, and I will just say every community tends to have community development corporations or neighborhood, we're a Neighbor Works America member. Like, every community has them. Boston has many incredible organizations. Like, you can start there, you can start at the library, you can start with the elected officials. I don't think there's a wrong place to start. I think it's the idea. The idea just speaks for itself. And then you kind of like bring the partners together. It's great to have leadership at the city. Quite honestly, like, had we not brought it at the time, the city wasn't thinking about it in this way. right? Like now the city of New York is all over this, issuing RFPs, you know, this is the best thing since sliced bread kind of a thing. Back in 2006, they were like worried about other things.
I think it's also helpful to understand what problems are being solved to start with. So in our case, it is the housing challenges that we have. And it is also a certain set of still aging libraries that need to be renovated, not too dissimilar than what Michelle has just described. But it could be housing with something else. It doesn't have to be a library, or it could be some other public asset that gets combined with a library. But I think the impetus here is that, you know, as citizens, as residents of our local jurisdictions, what is the best use of our public assets, and what are the services and things that will make our communities better that could be a more optimized result. Then you got to go sell that to the community, you got to sell that to your stakeholders, your elected officials, and really convene, whether it's through public process or through other forms of partnership, the right people to actually get it done.
That seems like some great words to end this webinar on, and I think we've handled most of the questions here. I'd like to, thank our guest panelists here, Michelle, Bill, David. Thank you everyone for attending. Yeah, we really appreciate your time and the innovation that you're leading in your communities, and hopefully folks on this call learned something. We will send a follow-up email with slides and follow-up information. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Jonathan at Housing for Virginia, and we can make any connections or hopefully answer any other follow-up questions. But thanks again, and
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you. Have a
Thank you
great one.
all. Bye-bye.
Bye.